these people talking, sick of all this noise. I'm headed straight for the castle.
Welcome back, folks, to another week of Mount & Blade Bannerlord news updates. Today we'll be coming back to talk about two different blog posts. The first being last week's post titled Sieges Part 1 that goes into some information about the experience, and this week's one titled Multiplayer Class System, which goes into some long-awaited information about Bannerlord's ongoing closed beta. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Kicking it off with the Siege blog post, it starts off by describing what you'd experience when you first arrive inside the Siege. It reads as follows. Picture the scene. You find yourself deep in enemy territory. After seizing a stronghold, you pause for a respite. The campaign has been long and costly, and supplies are running low. And then on the horizon, you see your worst fears realized. At first, a low rumble and blur of color, but then slowly, the standards and banners of the enemy army come into focus. Your army is ill-prepared for a field battle, but even so, you dig in. The post goes on to talk about that even though they've already talked about certain siege mechanics in previous blog posts, they haven't yet discussed the different ways and trade-offs that are involved in any amount of detail. So in this week's blog post, they dive into the options related to the sieges in a more comprehensive manner. For example, sieges and Bannerlords are dangerous affairs for both the besieged and the besiegers. If you're defending, you may already be facing bleak odds. The enemy may be bombarding your walls with trebuchets with the hopes of creating a breach to exploit, or may be preparing an assault with siege towers and rams. But even in dire situations, we still have options. We can either be like this, or we can be more like this. We'll have the ability to either beat off the assault or hope that a relief force may arrive soon to drive away the besiegers. Or we can use our tactics skill to break out of the siege with relatively little losses, to save yourself and a majority of your army from annihilation. And lastly, we could try to parlay with the besiegers in the hopes that they will let us pass through the lines. If we're outside the walls coming to the aid of a defender, we also have a few options. We can attack right away, which will cause the forces inside the town to sally out and join the fight, and together we may hopefully overwhelm the attackers. Another option is to stay mobile outside of the siege camp, harassing the enemy army and attacking foragers/reinforcements in the hopes that they run out of supplies before they can take the castle. Our last option, which would be a pretty cool way to go, would be to use our tactics to this time break past the enemy lines and into the defenses to join the defending band. I am super excited to have the opportunity to do a pincer move on a besieging enemy. When I personally play Mount & Blade, I love having the ability to create majorly cavalry armies, and knowing that we can finally have our mounted troops be useful in sieges as well, so we don't have to keep rearranging them in the troop tree, is going to be amazing. I hope this mechanic especially goes well for the game. And next up, the multiplayer classes. So with the closed beta being underway, TaleWorlds has decided to discuss some elements of the multiplayer side of the game in more detail. In this current week's blog post, they took a look at the multiplayer class system. Starting it off, the classes are divided into three distinct categories: infantry, ranged, and cavalry. Their aim is to ensure that each class is a viable choice, allowing players to choose their preferred unit type while playing. Each of the classes has its own strengths and weaknesses, meaning no single class is particularly effective in every scenario. Some classes are clearly stronger and better equipped than others, but this doesn't necessarily mean they will perform at higher levels in all instances, and they also come at a much higher cost. They felt that this approach puts emphasis on coordination, communication, and synergy in their team-based game modes, and encourages players to experiment and react to the events that unfold during the match. Bannerlord also features a perk system that allows us to slightly change our loadout if we want to, tailoring our classes to our own particular playstyles or perhaps to counter the class selection of the opposing team. This change allows us to jump straight into the action, safe in knowledge that we aren't at a major disadvantage to our opponent in terms of equipment. One connected system that carried over from Warband's multiplayer with a slight rework was the money system. In Bannerlord, they refer to it as points, and instead of using it to select gear for our character, we instead use it to select our classes. Some of the game modes have a respawn function, so how we manage our points throughout the course of the rounds will determine which classes we'll have access to, including the number of respawns. Overall, they feel that these changes will go a long way in preventing a snowball effect, in which the winning team just gets stronger with each consecutive win. They want to deliver an even playing field, and that these changes will make the multiplayer class system fairer and more accessible, giving you the ability to see exactly who your opponent is. and what abilities or limitations they may have, allowing for the game to have some sort of balance. And that also marks the end of this update. Thank you all very much for joining me, and I hope you have a good rest of your week, and farewell.